The Godfather Part 3 wasn't just the end of a cinematic dynasty. It was a confession of guilt, a war behind the camera, and the unraveling of one man's empire, both Michael Corleone's and Francis Ford Coppola's. What audiences never saw were the sleepless nights, the collapsing finances, and the creative battles that nearly destroyed the legacy of one of the greatest film series in history. Secrets burned through the set like wildfire, casting walkouts, rewrites, done in panic and a last-minute family decision that would haunt the director for decades. Here are 15 dark facts about The Godfather Part 3, and when you reach the end, the bonus fact will completely change how you see the Corleones forever. Fact number 15. The film that was never meant to exist. The Godfather Part 3 was never meant to happen. Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo were done after Part 2. They viewed that film as the perfect ending. But when Coppola's production company went bankrupt following the failure of One from the Heart, the director was desperate. Paramount offered him a chance to save himself by returning to the Corleones. The studio did not want closure, it wanted money. Coppola reluctantly accepted crafting not a continuation, but an epilogue, a story of an aging man trying to redeem his soul. Every frame of the film carries the exhaustion of its creator. What was meant to be a story of triumph became one of penance. The Godfather Part 3 was not born out of inspiration, it was born out of financial survival and creative guilt. Fact number 14. The death of Michael Corleone that wasn't allowed. Coppola and Puzo never wanted the title The Godfather Part 3. Their preferred name was The Death of Michael Corleone. It said everything the film stood for, a man trying to wash the blood from his hands and finally paying the price. But the studio executives refused. They wanted a brand, not a requiem. The words Part 3 promised the same power, violence, and majesty of the previous films, even though this one was slower, sadder, and haunted by regret. By forcing the generic title, the studio set false expectations, and audiences came looking for another grand mafia saga. What they got instead was a spiritual tragedy. The film was never about the mafia, it was about mortality. The real tragedy was not Michael's death, it was the corporate death of art under commercial control. Fact number 13. Robert Duvall's refusal that shattered the family. Robert Duvall was supposed to return as Tom Hagen, the Corleone family's trusted consigliere, but when he discovered Al Pacino was earning nearly 5 times more than him, Duvall walked away. He said he did not mind making less, but he wanted a fairer ratio. The studio refused. His departure ripped a hole through the heart of the film. Hagen was not just a lawyer, he was Michael's conscience. Without him, the family dynamic collapsed. Coppola was forced to invent a new character, B.J. Harrison, played by George Hamilton, a soulless business-like replacement. Fans noticed the difference instantly. The warmth, the tension, the subtle balance between loyalty and logic all gone. What should have been a reunion of the original Corleone family turned into a fractured echo of its former self. Without Tom Hagen, Michael's redemption was incomplete, and the family was never whole again. Fact number 12. The casting disaster that broke Sophia Coppola. The role of Mary Corleone was first given to Winona Ryder, who dropped out just before filming, citing exhaustion. With no time left, Francis Ford Coppola made the most personal and controversial decision of his career. He cast his daughter Sophia as Mary. She was 19, inexperienced, and thrust into one of the most scrutinized roles in cinema history. Critics were merciless. They called her wooden, untrained, unworthy. What they did not see was the impossible pressure she faced, her father's reputation, the studio's resentment, and the media's cruelty. On set, Pacino and Garcia protected her like family, but the damage was done. Sophia's performance became the scapegoat for the film's flaws, and she withdrew from acting soon after. Years later, Coppola admitted he put his daughter in the line of fire. It was not nepotism, it was desperation. A father trying to save his film, by sacrificing his child's peace. Fact number 11. The Vatican scandal that was all too real. Behind the fiction of The Godfather Part 3 was a chilling truth. The movie's Vatican banking subplot was not invention, it was reflection. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Italy was rocked by the Banco Ambrosiano scandal, where priests, financiers, and mobsters intertwined in webs of fraud, murder, and mystery. Coppola and Puzo used this as their foundation. They mirrored real figures like Roberto Calvi, the God's banker, who was found hanged beneath a London bridge, and reimagined them through the character of Archbishop Gilday. The corruption within sacred walls fascinated Coppola. He wanted to show that the rot of power was not limited to gangsters, it extended to those who claimed divine authority. The Godfather Part 3 dared to accuse the Church of greed and hypocrisy at a time when no other mainstream film would. It was not just cinematic fiction, it was heresy disguised as art. Fact number 10. The 6-week writing frenzy. The Godfather Part 3 was made under an impossible deadline. Paramount wanted a Christmas release no matter what. Francis Ford Coppola had barely 6 weeks to finish the script, shoot the film, and deliver a masterpiece. 6 weeks to craft the final chapter of the most celebrated crime saga in cinema. Every page was written in panic. Every scene carried the smell of urgency. The production moved like a runaway train with rewrites done on set and decisions made in minutes. Actors received lines only hours before shooting. There was no time for reflection or perfection. The chaos bled into the tone of the movie. It feels rushed, fragmented, haunted by exhaustion. What audiences never knew is that behind the majestic score and operatic lighting stood a director racing against time itself. It was not art born from patience. It was survival carved from pressure. Fact number 9. The Nightmare of Sicily. When the crew arrived in Palermo, they expected beauty. What they found was bedlam. Real Sicilian festivals overlapped with the shoot. Thousands of locals flooded the streets, making controlled shots nearly impossible. Police struggled to hold crowds back, while extras blurred with tourists. The crew had to hide cameras inside vendor stalls and balconies to capture scenes. Everything was done under heat dust and confusion. The climactic sequence in the opera house spilled outside into real chaos when fireworks and gunfire echoed together. Locals believed a riot had broken out. The line between fiction and reality vanished. Coppola wanted authenticity, and he got it, but at a price. The crew slept little, ate less, and endured endless noise. What you see on screen is not just cinematic spectacle, it is genuine madness caught on film. Fact number 8. The director's pain on screen. Francis Ford Coppola poured his grief into Michael Corleone. The director had recently lost his eldest son in a boating accident. That pain shaped every frame. The hospital scenes where Michael lies broken after a stroke mirror Coppola's own despair. The Godfather Part 3 became his confession, his way of asking forgiveness for ambition and loss. The film's melancholy tone and slow rhythm come from a man mourning, not a character acting. Behind the grandeur is a quiet lament for family dreams and death. Michael's guilt is Coppola's guilt. His failure to save his family mirrors the director's regret over his own personal tragedies. It was not just a gangster story, it was the cry of a father who had seen too much and could no longer separate life from cinema. Fact number 7. Andy Garcia's War for Respect. Andy Garcia joined the cast as Vincent Mancini, the fiery, illegitimate son of Sonny Corleone. For him, it was both a dream and a trial. Surrounded by legends like Al Pacino and Diane Keaton, Garcia felt the weight of history pressing down. On set, he fought to earn every line, every look, every ounce of authority. Coppola pushed him relentlessly, demanding raw energy and controlled rage. Garcia gave everything and nearly collapsed during the opera finale, where he had to perform real stunts amid live gunfire blanks and screaming crowds. When the film was released, critics hailed him as the movie's heartbeat. Yet Garcia later admitted the role haunted him. It became a shadow he could never outgrow. Not fame, but burden. Not triumph, but a crown of thorns that defined his career forever. Fact number 6. The opera scene that almost turned fatal. The climax of The Godfather Part 3 unfolds inside the Teatro Massimo in Palermo. The scene mixes live opera with assassination and heartbreak. What few know is that the danger was real. The opera house was packed with hundreds of extras, real musicians, and loaded set pieces. During one take, a stage prop collapsed, nearly crushing 2 performers. Electrical sparks from lighting rigs rained onto the orchestra pit. The chaos froze the set. Coppola refused to cut. He whispered to his cinematographer to keep rolling because the confusion looked authentic. When Pacino screamed at the end of the scene that anguish was not acting. The sound of panic around him was real human fear. That final sequence immortalized both the grandeur and the danger of practical filmmaking. Not controlled artifice, but living peril disguised as tragedy. Fact number 5. Al Pacino's near-death on set. During the filming of Michael Corleone's diabetic stroke scene, Al Pacino nearly lost his life. The sequence required him to collapse with violent realism, and he insisted on performing it without a double. The heat in the Sicilian courtyard was unbearable, and Pacino had been wearing multiple layers of heavy costume for continuity. As he staggered and fell, he actually blacked out for several seconds. Crew members thought he was still acting until they noticed his breathing stop. A medic rushed in and revived him on the spot. Coppola later said, "The moment blurred fiction and truth in a way that haunted him." Pacino returned to set the next day determined to finish the scene exactly where he had fallen. The final take you see in the movie carries traces of that real exhaustion and pain. It is not just acting, it is a man's body surrendering to the weight of guilt and time. Fact number 4. Diane Keaton's silent rage. Diane Keaton returned as Kay after years of publicly criticizing the moral decay of the Corleone world. She accepted the role reluctantly, believing it would close Kay's story for good. But on set, she was stunned by how diminished her character had become. Once Michael's equal, she now existed on the margins of his regret. Keaton argued with Coppola about the rewrites and the lack of emotional balance. She wanted Kay to confront Michael one final time with the full weight of her suffering. Coppola agreed in spirit, but had no time to restructure. Keaton's fury spilled into her performance. Watch the dinner scene in Sicily when Kay looks at Michael and tells him he will never change. That cold stare is not scripted venom. It is Diane Keaton channeling real frustration with the film's direction. Her performance anchors the tragedy with quiet anger that feels painfully authentic. Fact number 3. The soundtrack of Mourning. Nino Rota's music had defined the first 2 films, but for Part 3, the responsibility fell to Carmine Coppola, Francis's father. The elder Coppola was in fragile health, yet he composed tirelessly from his home in Napa Valley, crafting an operatic lament that fused Sicilian folk themes with Catholic requiem tones. He often played the pieces to Francis over the phone late at night, saying he wanted the score to sound like a soul climbing toward heaven and failing. The result was haunting. Every note echoes Michael's guilt and loneliness. The theme, "Promise Me You'll Live," was written only days before Carmine was hospitalized for exhaustion. When he died shortly after the film's release, the soundtrack became a final gift from father to son. It was not simply accompaniment. It was the film's conscience whispering that even beauty cannot absolve sin. Fact number 2, the alternate ending that vanished. Originally, The Godfather Part 3 ended differently. In the first cut, Michael Corleone did not die at all. He sat alone in his garden, a living corpse trapped in silence, while a montage of lost faces drifted through his mind. The studio rejected it, claiming audiences needed a definitive end. Coppola reluctantly filmed the now famous scene of Michael slumping dead beside his dog. Yet he later revealed that he preferred the earlier version because Michael's survival was a greater punishment. To live without redemption was far crueler than to die. The alternate ending was never released, but a few crew members claim the footage still exists in private archives. If true, it would show Michael fading into the same void he created for others, a ghost among the living, instead of a martyr in death. Fact number 1. The legacy of regret. When The Godfather Part 3 premiered, critics were merciless. They called it tired, confused, and unnecessary. Coppola was devastated. He had poured his pain, his losses, and his financial desperation into this movie only to see it ridiculed. But decades later, a new generation of filmmakers began to view it differently. They saw it not as failure, but as confession, a meditation on guilt, aging, and the cost of ambition. In 2020, Coppola released a new version titled The Godfather Coda, the death of Michael Corleone, restoring his original vision and trimming away studio interference. Audiences finally understood what he had been trying to say all along. The film was never about power or blood. It was about penance, about a man crushed under the weight of his own legend. What once looked like weakness now feels like truth. The final chapter aged into something prophetic and painfully human. Bonus fact, the line that haunts forever. Francis Ford Coppola once admitted that the line, "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in," was not written as metaphor. It was his cry of frustration toward Hollywood. He had escaped the system after Apocalypse Now, yet debt and pressure dragged him back into the same world he swore to leave. Michael's agony was the director's own. That one line became the soul of the film, a reflection of every artist who tries to break free only to be consumed again by their creation. Decades later, Coppola said that making Part 3 aged him faster than any. Warzone. The movie ended Michael's story, but it also ended a part of the man who created him. Behind the gold light and holy music, there lies a truth, darker than any murder. In the end, no one ever leaves the family, not even the director himself. The Godfather Part 3 was never meant to glorify crime or revisit glory. It was a confession written in shadows by a man confronting his failures. What began as a studio demand became a meditation on loss, guilt, and the illusion of redemption. Time has been kind to it. Its flaws now look like scars earned through survival. In the end, the Corleone saga closes not with triumph but with silence. A king dies alone, a family fades, and cinema is left with one last truth: power always costs the soul. Stay tuned for more untold stories from behind the camera, and remember, sometimes the real drama happens when the lights go out.